She's just a burden. Dead weight. Those words, my daughter's words, cut through the quiet like a knife, sharp and unexpected. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I was just getting a glass of water in the dark, careful not to wake anyone. But there I stood, rooted to the hallway floor, hearing Carol speak about me as if I were already gone, a useless shadow, a ghost with no purpose, a mother, unneeded. It was a moment I'll never forget. The night air hung heavy around me, pressing in like the silence between the floorboards. I leaned against the wall, my breath shallow, heart thudding like a frightened drum. Just moments earlier, I had tiptoed from the guest room, the one I'd been staying in for the past 3 months after my husband, Charles, passed. We'd been married 45 years. Cancer took him quickly, cruelly, and it left me adrift in a world I no longer recognized. Carol thought I was asleep. She was in the kitchen, talking on the phone, probably to a friend or a colleague. Her voice was low, but every word hit its mark. "Mom's completely lost without Dad," she said. "It's like she doesn't know how to function unless someone's telling her what to do." My knees nearly buckled. Was that how she saw me, as some dependent relic, clinging to old routines and fading memories? I didn't stay to hear more. I couldn't. Back in the room, the same room I helped her pay for years ago with my retirement savings, I sat on the edge of the bed, stunned. I looked around at the few possessions I had brought with me. A photo of Charles and me on our 30th anniversary. The pearl earrings he gave me that year. Carol's childhood drawings I'd saved in a box, yellowed at the edges. Memories that used to feel warm now felt like accusations. Dead weight. That phrase echoed in my head over and over, louder than any grief I'd known. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I quietly packed my suitcase, folded each shirt with shaking hands, tucked away the remnants of a life I'd built, one that now felt like a burden to the very person I thought I could rely on. By dawn, I brewed myself one last cup of tea in Carol's kitchen. As I stirred the honey in, I noticed how loose my wedding ring had become. I had lost weight, but not in the way people usually mean it. I slipped the ring off and placed it inside a tiny porcelain teacup, the same one Carol used to serve her doll's imaginary tea from years ago. Then I left. No goodbyes, no drama, just silence and the soft roll of suitcase wheels on the pavement as I stepped away from the house and from the woman my daughter believed I had become. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to go. The bus rumbled beneath me as I left everything familiar behind. I hadn't even decided on a destination when I walked away from Carol's home that morning. I just knew I needed space to breathe, to mourn, to remember who I was before I was someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's invisible shadow. I let instinct guide me, and by noon I found myself stepping off a dusty Greyhound in a small coastal town called Seabrook. The sea breeze greeted me like an old friend, brushing against my cheek with salt and sun. There was something about that air alive, unfiltered, that stirred something deep within me, something that had been asleep for far too long. Main Street was lined with weathered shops and faded awnings. It wasn't polished or trendy. It was honest, a place that didn't pretend to be anything more than what it was. I sat on a bench near the harbor, watching fishing boats bob gently in the water, their hulls chipped and paint peeled. That's when I met Harold. Beautiful. "Isn't it?" he said, standing beside me with a paper bag in one hand and a cane in the other. I turned to him, surprised at how steady my voice sounded after such a whirlwind of grief. "It is," I said. "I think I'm starting over." He nodded, as if that were the most natural thing in the world. Best place for it. I'm Harold. By the way, own the bookshop down the street. I introduced myself as Sadie, not Mrs. Harrington, not Mom, just Sadie, and I hadn't felt like her in years. When I mentioned that I'd once been a librarian, his eyes lit up. That's so. Well, Sadie, this might be fate. I've been needing someone to help run the shop. My eyes aren't what they used to be, and the computer system, well, it may as well be written in ancient Greek. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time since Charles passed. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a purpose, he replied, with a smile that reached into my bones. He showed me the room above the shop. It was small, modest, but clean. The window overlooked the harbor, and when the light hit just right, you could see the glimmer of the sea like a promise. I didn't hesitate. I took the job. I took the room. I took the chance. That first week at Harbor Lights Books felt like stepping into someone else's life. There were receipts to file, stock to catalog, regulars to greet. Harold was patient, kind, and endlessly grateful. By the second week, I'd reorganized the children's section and created a cozy reading nook with cushions I sewed myself from discounted fabric at the local craft shop. You've got the magic touch, Harold told me one afternoon as we watched a young mother read to her toddler in the corner. Haven't seen this many kids in here in years. I smiled, and for once, the pride I felt wasn't tethered to anyone else. This was mine, my doing, my space. My phone, of course, had other ideas. Carol called, and called again. I didn't answer, not yet. I wasn't ready to hear her anger, or worse, her guilt. I did reply once, I'm safe. I need time. Please respect that. She didn't respond. The silence was mutual, and somehow merciful. It was Michael, my son in Seattle, who handled things with more grace. He called once, just to make sure I was all right. You've earned the right to reinvent yourself, Mom, he said gently. Just promise you'll come visit the grandkids when you're ready. His words meant more than he knew. As September melted into October, Seabrook wrapped itself around me like a soft shawl. I found rhythm again, mornings in the shop, afternoons walking the shoreline, evenings on my tiny balcony with a cup of tea and the steady hum of seagulls. On Saturdays, I hosted a reading hour for children, and to my surprise, the shop filled with laughter and little feet. One rainy Tuesday, while shelving new arrivals, the front bell jingled. A woman about Carol's age stepped inside, shaking rain from her umbrella. I'm Diana, the elementary school principal, she said after we exchanged greetings. Harold mentioned you used to be a librarian 2 hours later. I left the school with a volunteer position. I would be helping children who struggled with reading 3 afternoons a week. As I walked back beneath a clearing sky, damp leaves underfoot, I realized I hadn't thought about Charles all day, or Carol. The ache was still there, but it had dulled. It no longer defined me. You're blooming, Harold said one evening as we closed the shop, like one of those desert flowers that only needs a little water to come back to life. I chuckled, but he wasn't wrong. I was blooming slowly, quietly, beautifully. Sadie, the bookseller. Sadie, the teacher. Sadie, who watched sunsets alone and didn't feel lonely doing it. It was a quiet Thursday evening when my phone buzzed again, Carol's name lighting up the screen for the 3rd time that week. I silenced it like I had the others, unsure if I was ready to face whatever was waiting on the other end. But this time, the call didn't go to voicemail. This time, a voicemail came from someone else. Mrs. Harrington, This is Elaine Winters, Carol's business partner. I know we haven't met, but I'm worried, really worried. Carol's in trouble. The business is failing, and she's not herself. I'm sorry to reach out like this, but I didn't know who else to call. I froze. The concern in Elaine's voice was real, not the polished worry of a colleague protecting a brand. My daughter, always poised, always polished, was unraveling. That night, I sat on the little balcony of my Seabrook apartment, staring out over the harbor, the salty breeze carrying whispers from waves and memories. The moonlight shimmered across the water like scattered glass. I thought of Carol, not the woman who called me deadweight, but the girl who once placed Band-Aids on my arm while pretending to be a doctor, who once cried when her goldfish died, who once slipped her tiny hand in mine on the first day of kindergarten. I didn't sleep much, and by sunrise, I knew I had to go. Family emergency. I told Harold the next morning, my suitcase already packed. He nodded. No questions asked. The shop will survive. You go take care of yours. The bus ride back to the suburbs felt like time travel in reverse. The coastline faded. The concrete returned. With every mile, I felt a familiar weight settle over my shoulders, not grief this time, but fear. Fear that I would walk back into that house and find exactly what Elaine described, or worse. When I arrived, the garden was overgrown. Newspapers were piled on the front porch. The house looked nothing like the one I'd left months ago. I rang the bell 3 times before I heard movement. And then the door opened. Carol stood there, barely recognizable. Her once glossy hair hung limp around her face. Her eyes, ringed in dark shadows, looked older than mine. "Mom," she whispered, like she wasn't sure I was real. "Can I come in?" I asked softly. The house was a mess. Dishes in the sink, clothes strewn across furniture, dust in corners. This from my daughter, who used to color-code her spices. "Mark moved out last month," she said as we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd left my wedding ring. "He said he needed space, but really, he's with his assistant, 24 years old. Can you believe it?" I listened quietly as she unraveled. After I left, she had thrown herself into work, desperate to land a high-stakes account that could save her marketing firm. But the home life she had built so dependent on my silent support crumbled in my absence. Arguments with Mark escalated. Resentments festered. Then, one night, he packed a bag and didn't come back. "I missed the Henderson presentation," she said, voice cracking. I was too busy fighting with Mark over the phone. Elaine tried to cover for me, but it was a disaster. We lost the account, and 3 more clients after that. Tears spilled down her face. "I'm sorry, Mom, for what I said, for what I thought. You weren't the burden. I was too selfish to see what you were holding together." I reached across the table and took her hand. It was small and trembling, like when she was little and scraped her knee. "What are you going to do?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't know. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. Mark's threatening to sue for his share of the business. I might lose everything. There was a time not long ago when I would have jumped in to fix it all, packed up and moved back in, paid the bills, held her hand through every storm, but I wasn't that woman anymore. You won't lose everything, I said firmly. You still have yourself. She looked at me, confused, and I understood why, because she didn't know who that was anymore. When your father died and I moved in with you, I thought I had lost everything. I didn't know how to be without him. I thought I needed someone to tell me what to do. But when I heard what you said that night, as much as it hurt, It forced me to find out who I really was. She flinched. Mom, let me finish. I said gently. I found someone strong, capable, someone who had been quiet for too long, waiting to speak. You need to find her in yourself now. But you left. Carol whispered. You didn't even say goodbye. Sometimes, leaving is the only way to come back to yourself. We talked for hours that day, for the first time in years. We really listened. I told her about Seabrook, about the bookstore, the reading corner, the children who giggled during story time. She listened with something like wonder. You sound happy, she said, sounding almost surprised. I am. I told her, but that doesn't mean I ever stopped loving you. What I didn't tell her not yet was what Elaine had said about Mark, about the missing money, about the secrets buried in the company accounts and the shell of a marriage that had already started to rot before I ever walked away. There were truths Carol hadn't uncovered yet, and ones I wasn't sure she was ready to face. But I was there now, and when the time came, I would help her face them, not as a mother cleaning up her child's mess, but as a woman standing beside another woman, helping her rise. I stayed with Carol for 3 days. We didn't talk much the first night. She slept, really slept for the first time in what looked like weeks. I cleaned, quietly, methodically, as if scrubbing the countertops could help her rebuild her life from scratch. On the second day, as Carol was showering, her phone rang. I almost let it go to voicemail, but when I saw the name Elaine flash across the screen, I picked it up. Carol, thank God. We need to talk about Mark. It's Sadie, I said softly. Carol's mother. She's upstairs. There was a pause, then a quiet exhale of relief. You're there. Good. I didn't want to overwhelm her, but things are worse than she knows. I've been going over the company's accounts. And Sadie, I think Mark's been stealing. My stomach tightened. How much? Almost $200,000. Large transfers, monthly, to a shell company I traced back to him and his girlfriend. I felt cold all over. When Carol came downstairs in a robe and towel, the look on my face must have given me away. Her eyes searched mine. What is it? She asked. I led her to the kitchen table, the same one where I had once placed my wedding ring, and gently explained what Elaine had found. Carol listened in stunned silence. Her face paled with each word. 200,000, she whispered. That's your entire operating capital, I said. She nodded slowly. The business is finished. Not necessarily, I said, a plan forming in my mind. But we need to act quickly and smart. We need to gather everything, every piece of evidence. And we need someone who knows how to fight this. Carol looked at me with something between awe and fear. You want to fight him? I'm not letting him walk away with everything you built. The next morning, we met Elaine at the office, a once busy marketing firm that now looked like a ghost town. Only a few loyal employees remained, their faces drawn but determined. Elaine had done her homework. She laid out bank statements, forged authorizations, and emails from Mark to their accountant, disguising the transfers as investments. But the company Horizon Ventures didn't exist. It was a dummy account created 6 months earlier. That's when we went to Cancun for our anniversary, Carol said quietly. He said he had to take work calls. Turns out he was stealing while I sunbathed. We took the evidence to a lawyer Elaine trusted, Vivian, a sharp woman with graying hair and eyes like steel. You have enough here for both civil and criminal cases, she said after scanning the documents. The mortgage forgeries alone could put him behind bars. Add embezzlement, And it's serious. Carol sat still, twisting a pen between her fingers. I don't know if I want him in jail, she murmured. I just want what's mine. Vivian leaned forward. That may be exactly how you get it. The threat of prison tends to make people cooperative. We left her office with a plan Vivian would file for an emergency injunction to freeze Mark's assets. Elaine would contact clients to repair damaged relationships. Carol would secure what was left of the company's finances. And me, I had a role to play too. That evening, I did something I never imagined. I called Mark. Mrs. Harrington. He answered. Surprised. Carol said you moved away. I did, but I came back when I heard about your separation. I was wondering, could we meet, just the two of us? There was a pause. Why? Because, I said calmly, you were my son-in-law for 15 years. I think you owe me a conversation. We agreed to meet the next morning at a coffee shop on Elm Street, a place we once went together as a family on Sunday mornings. Charles would read the newspaper, and Carol would talk strategy while I quietly observed. Now, I would not be silent. I arrived early, a manila folder beside my untouched latte. Mark arrived late, thinner than I remembered. His confidence had dimmed, his designer shirt hanging awkwardly on his frame. Sadie, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. You look well. I've found that independence suits me. He ordered black coffee, his eyes never leaving the folder. So, what do you want? I opened it slowly. I think you know. Horizon Ventures, the second mortgage, the missing funds. His face paled slightly, but he kept his composure. Carol's been feeding you lies. I see. No, I said, tapping the papers. The bank statements did, and the emails, and the forged documents, and this. I slid over a signed statement from his girlfriend. Elaine had spoken to her directly. His mask cracked. She talked to you. She's not as naive as you thought, especially when she realized she could be charged as an accessory. He leaned back and ran his hands through his thinning hair. Then, to my surprise, he laughed bitter and low. I never wanted any of this, he said. Not the firm, not the big house. Carol wanted to build an empire, and I got dragged along. I asked to quit once 3 years ago, wanted to teach architecture. She threatened divorce, said she'd take everything. That doesn't justify theft. I said coldly, no, it doesn't. But it wasn't about greed. It was survival. He reached into his coat and placed a flash drive on the table. That has every transfer, every password, and recordings of our conversations. Some of them will change how you see her. I stared at the device. Why are you giving me this? Because I'm tired, he said. And I want a clean break. Return the money. Walk away. No lawsuits. No prison. He stood. Oh, and Sadie, when you hear those recordings, remember something. What people do. Desperate things when they feel trapped. That night, back at Carol's, I sat with the flash drive in my hand, a small object, but heavy with truth. I didn't know what I'd hear, only that after I did nothing between my daughter and me would ever be the same. That night, I waited until Carol went to bed before I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. At first, I thought I might not open the audio files. I told myself the bank statements would be enough. The transfers were all there, every monthly. $12, $750, moved like clockwork into the fake account. The money, astonishingly, had not been spent, just relocated. But it wasn't the numbers that haunted me. It was the question Mark left behind. Those recordings might change how you see her. I clicked on the first file. The date showed it was from over 2 years ago. Carol's voice came through the speakers, clear and cold. If you leave this company, Mark, I'll make sure you walk away with nothing. Nothing. Is that what you want, to throw away everything we've built because you're suddenly not fulfilled? Mark's reply was quieter, but filled with fatigue. I don't recognize you anymore. Carol, when did happiness become a liability? Her response hit like a slap. When I realized happiness doesn't pay the bills. My mother spent her whole life living in my father's shadow. No job, no voice, no identity. I won't be like her. I won't be weak. I flinched. That was how she saw me. Weak. I listened to every recording that night. Conversations layered with resentment, ambition, and fear. In some, Carol's voice trembled with exhaustion. In others, it sharpened into something ruthless. She talked about clients like pawns, about exploiting vulnerabilities to land deals, about how emotions got in the way, and over again, I heard my name, not spoken, exactly, but referenced. I was the ghost she was running from, the cautionary tale she swore she'd never become. I closed the laptop just as dawn broke over the horizon. My coffee sat cold beside me. I didn't even remember making it. There were no heroes in those recordings. No pure victims, just two people clawing at each other as their lives unraveled. Later that morning, Carol came down the stairs, her eyes red and tired. She stood in the doorway, silent. I heard you listening last night, she said. I sat outside your room. I was too afraid to come in. I pushed a mug of coffee across the table. You should have. I didn't want to see your face. I looked at her, really looked, and for a moment, I didn't see my daughter. I saw the version of her she'd hidden from the world. Hardened, hurting. Do you think I'm a monster? She asked, voice cracking. Are you going to leave again? I'm not leaving, I said. But we need to talk, really talk, and we did. We sat across from one another at that kitchen table for hours. No yelling, no hiding, just two women unraveling years of silence. She told me how she'd watched me defer to Charles in everything, how she'd sworn never to give up that much of herself for anyone not a husband, not a family, how she'd mistaken control for strength, success for safety. I was terrified, she admitted, terrified I'd end up depending on someone, needing someone, like I thought you did. I reached across the table and took her hand. You saw me as weak, I said quietly, but that wasn't weakness. Carol, that was survival. I loved your father, but I gave up more of myself than I should have. I let him lead because it kept peace, but inside, I was still there, waiting for what she asked. For this, I said, for Seabrook, for a second chance, for a life that was mine. She looked at me, tears in her eyes. Who are you now? I smiled. I'm Sadie. I read books to kids on Saturday mornings. I make tea with honey. I sit on my balcony and watch the harbor come alive. And I've learned that strength doesn't mean going it alone. We sat in silence, the morning sun warming the floor beneath our feet. Then I said the thing I hadn't meant to. I heard the way you talked about clients, about people. She flinched. I know. Is that who you want to be? No, she whispered. It's who I became. You don't have to stay her. She nodded. I want to change, but I don't know how. I squeezed her hand. You just did. That evening, Carol called Vivian, the lawyer, and told her she didn't want to press charges against Mark, but she did want her money back. Clean, quiet, final. And she wanted to fix her company not just financially, but ethically. I created something toxic, she told me later. but maybe it's not too late to make it something good. That night, I walked into the guest room, lay on the bed I once felt like a burden in, and for the first time, I felt at peace. My daughter hadn't just seen me. She was starting to see herself. Carol changed after that morning, not all at once. Change, I've learned, doesn't arrive like a thunderstorm. It comes like a slow tide, quiet, steady, and relentless. The next afternoon, she called her remaining employees into the conference room. Some of them looked wary. A few wouldn't even meet her eyes. "I owe you the truth," Carol began, standing in front of them, not behind a desk or a PowerPoint. "This company lost its soul because I forgot mine." She told them everything about the toxic culture she'd allowed to grow, the shortcuts she'd encouraged, and the way ambition had blinded her to what truly mattered. She offered severance packages to those who wanted to leave. To the few who chose to stay, she promised a new structure, fairer hours, profit sharing, and a voice at the table. Some clapped, some cried, some just nodded and went back to their desks, unsure if it would last. But it was a start. That evening, she and I sat on the porch swing Charles had built years ago. The air was cool, the stars peeking through the suburban haze. She looked over at me and asked quietly, "Do you think I can save it?" I shook my head. "I don't know. But maybe saving the business isn't the most important thing to save." She smiled. It was tired, but real. Within a week, she sold the big house. It was a mutual decision, too large, too full of ghosts, and too burdened with debt. Instead, she bought a small cottage near the edge of town. One story, modest garden, just enough space to breathe. She moved her firm into a shared co-working space and rebranded it around values that actually meant something to her: transparency, creativity, balance. Clients who aligned with that vision returned. Others quietly disappeared. She let them. And, in what surprised me most of all, she started volunteering, once a week at first, then more. She helped women at a local shelter build resumes, learn budgeting, and practice job interviews. Women who, like her, had been knocked off center. Women who reminded her of who she could have become if she hadn't found her way back. As for Mark, the divorce was final within 2 months. No drawn-out hearings, no shouting in court. He returned every cent. Vivian drafted the settlement with precision, and Carol signed it with calm determination. Mark moved to Portland. Rumor had it he was teaching architecture at the community college, finally living the life he once begged Carol to let him choose. I stayed a while longer to help her settle into the new cottage. I planted herbs by the kitchen window and helped hang curtains that didn't quite match, but somehow still belonged. We cooked dinner together, real dinners, with laughter and stories and silence that felt comfortable, but I knew I couldn't stay forever. One night, as we sat in her tiny backyard beneath strings of cafe lights, she said, "You could stay here. We're just getting to know each other again." I smiled. "We don't have to live in the same house to love each other." I said, "Besides, there's a bookshop waiting for me, and a man who texts me every day to ask when I'm coming home. Harold." She grinned. I felt a blush rise to my cheeks. "He's patient and kind and sees me exactly as I am." "Are you in love with him?" I paused, then answered truthfully, "I don't know. But I'm open to the possibility." And that being open again felt like the greatest gift Seabrook had given me. The next morning, as I boarded the bus back to the coast, Carol pressed something into my hand. It was the old porcelain teacup. My wedding ring still rested inside. "I think you should have this back," she said. "Not to wear it, but to remember all of it. the good years, the hard ones, the freedom you earned. I held the cup in my palm. It felt small, but powerful. Thank you, I whispered, for seeing me. She hugged me tightly. You showed me how. As the bus pulled away, I looked out the window and watched my daughter, my complicated, courageous, imperfect daughter, standing tall in the morning light. And I knew she was going to be just fine. When I stepped off the bus in Seabrook, Harold was waiting. He stood just outside the little station, hands tucked into the pockets of his worn wool coat, his smile as familiar as the salt in the air. Behind him stood a small group of children, my Saturday morning readers, holding handmade signs that read, "Welcome home, Miss Sadie." "There she is," Harold said, taking my suitcase like he always had. "Told them you'd come back. Of course I came back," I said, slipping my arm through his. This is where I belong. The sun was just beginning to dip low on the horizon, the harbor shimmering with gold. As we walked back toward the bookshop, something in me settled like a puzzle piece finally finding its place. The air smelled of seaweed and paper and ink. Home. That evening, we closed the shop together, like we always did, me tidying the front counter. Harold fiddling with the stubborn lock on the back door. He asked about Carol, about how things had ended. "She's finding her way," I said, "just like I am." "And are you happy with the way you found?" he asked. I paused, thought of the teacup tucked away in my bag upstairs, with the wedding ring still resting inside. Thought of Carol, standing in her small garden, no longer drowning, but learning how to swim. "Yes," I said simply, "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." That night, I stood on my balcony as the moon rose over the water. A soft breeze brushed against my cheeks as my phone buzzed gently in my pocket. It was a text from Carol. "Started a mother-daughter book club at the shelter today. Thought of you with every page we turned." I smiled and typed back, "Save me a seat. I'll be there for the next chapter." And I meant it, because what I'd learned, what I'd lived was this: we are never too old to start over, never too broken to become whole again, never too far gone to come home to ourselves. And sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the ones that lead to the most beautiful returns. That's what Seabrook had given me, not just a second chance, but a second self. A woman who read to children and watched the tides. A woman who spoke her mind, who held space for others, but never erased herself again. A woman named Sadie. Just Sadie. The next morning, I brewed tea in the little kitchen behind the bookshop. Harold came in rubbing his eyes and muttering about his knees. We shared a quiet breakfast, eggs, toast, and a small bowl of blueberries. "I'm thinking of adding poetry readings on Friday nights," he said. I raised an eyebrow. Harold the romantic, Harold the retired dreamer. He grinned. "Besides, Seabrook needs more voices, maybe even yours." I laughed. "We'll see." And as the shop bell jingled and the first customer of the day stepped inside, I realized something simple and profound. This wasn't the ending of a story. It was the beginning of a new one. Mine. A week after I returned to Seabrook, life settled into a new rhythm, familiar, but somehow deeper. Harold and I reopened the reading corner with fresh cushions and a new lineup of picture books. The children returned like clockwork, their laughter echoing through the aisles. Every time I opened a storybook, their faces lit up as if I held magic in my hands. One Saturday, just after our reading session ended, a woman lingered behind. She looked to be in her late 30s, wearing a simple denim jacket and holding the hand of a shy little boy. "Miss Sadie," she said, "I just wanted to thank you. My son's never sat through a full story before. He's always so restless. But with you, her eyes filled, with you, he listens. I bent down to smile at the boy. You've got stories inside you too, sweetheart, just waiting to be heard. When they left, Harold leaned against the counter and said, You know, you never told me the rest of what happened with Carol, with Mark, with the business. I looked out the window at the harbor, where boats rocked gently in the afternoon sun. Some things are better told after they've settled, I said. He didn't press. That night, I finally unpacked the last item from my bag, the tiny porcelain teacup with my wedding ring nestled inside. I placed it on the shelf above my writing desk, right next to a photo of Charles and me on our 30th anniversary, both of us smiling with the naive certainty that we'd never change. But we had. I had. And the woman I had become was someone I could finally look in the mirror and not only recognize, but respect. A few days later, I received another text from Carol. Finalized settlement with the bank. Mark won't be touching a dime of the business again. Then another, a few hours later, started an anonymous fund for the women at the shelter. One of them asked if I'd come back to teach a financial literacy class. I said yes. Can you believe it? I could. And when I told Harold, he smiled and said, Looks like the apple didn't fall too far after all. We laughed, not because everything was perfect, but because we both knew healing rarely was. It's not tidy. It's not linear. It's messy and humbling, and often comes with a price, but it's worth it. The next time I visited Carol, she met me at the station holding 2 cups of tea and wearing a wide-brimmed hat that didn't quite suit her, but made her look happy. The cottage she'd moved into was small, but filled with color. Fresh flowers on the windowsills, books stacked on nearly every surface, and a new sense of peace that hadn't existed in the big house she once called home. She gave me a tour, proudly showing off her vegetable garden and a tiny corner of her living room she'd turned into a meditation nook. You used to call this stuff nonsense, I teased. I know. She grinned. Turns out I needed a little nonsense. That evening, after dinner, we sat outside under the string lights she'd hung by hand. Fireflies blinked lazily in the bushes, and for a long moment, neither of us said a word. Then she reached for my hand. I used to think you were weak, she said quietly, for staying with Dad, for staying silent. But now I see it was never weakness. It was sacrifice, a kind of strength I didn't understand. You don't have to admire the choices I made. I replied, but I hope you can forgive them. I already have, she said, because now I know how easy it is to lose yourself in someone else's idea of who you should be. We sat like that, fingers intertwined, under a sky full of stars, and for the first time in decades, I felt something between us mend, not because we forced it, but because we allowed it. The next morning, she handed me a note as I packed my bag. Come back whenever you want. Not because I need you, but because I want you. And that was enough. I've always believed that life moves in chapters, some short, some unbearably long, and a few so painful that you wish you could skip ahead. But as I stood behind the counter of Harbor Lights books, watching the late afternoon sun pour golden light across the wooden floors, I knew I had finally reached the beginning of a new one. It had been nearly 6 months since I first left my daughter's house in silence, suitcase in hand, heart cracked wide open. 6 months since I stopped being someone else's shadow and started living as Sadie. Not Mom, not Mrs. Harrington, just Sadie, and it was enough. The bookshop was quiet that day, a rare lull between the morning's reading hour and Harold's evening poetry group. I was restocking shelves when the bell above the door chimed. Carol stood there, holding a small suitcase and a hopeful smile. "I hope I didn't surprise you," she said, but I didn't want to call first and give myself the chance to back out. I blinked back tears. "Come in, sweetheart." We sat in the same little reading corner where so many children had curled up with stories and dreams. She glanced around, taking it all in the books, the soft light, the warmth of the space. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's home," I said. That night, she stayed in my apartment above the shop. We cooked dinner together, pasta and salad, and a bottle of red wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Afterward, we sat on the balcony, legs propped on the railing, the harbor shimmering beneath us. "I've missed you," she said. "I never stopped loving you," I replied. "Even when I needed space, I didn't understand back then." She admitted, "I was so angry, so sure that I was right about everything, and now I know better." She told me about the shelter, how she'd started a weekly book club for the women there, most of whom had never finished high school or held a steady job. She helped them read, reflect, and reclaim pieces of themselves they thought were lost forever. "It's slow work," she said, "but I think I'm finding my voice. And I want to help them find theirs too." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're doing more than helping," I said. "You're healing." The next morning, as she prepared to head back home, she handed me something wrapped in tissue paper. I unfolded it slowly. Inside was a photograph of the two of us taken years ago on the front porch of our old house. Carol was about 10, grinning with a gap-toothed smile, her arms flung around my neck. I looked younger, tired maybe, but happy, on the back. She'd written the version of you I carry with me, strong, loving, enough. I swallowed hard. "Thank you. You showed me how to start over." "Mom," she said, "even when it scared you, especially when it scared you." She hugged me tight. "Save me a seat at reading hour next time I visit. Always," I whispered. After she left, Harold found me wiping down the children's shelves. "Everything okay?" "She's growing," I said. "We both are." He nodded. Funny how life blooms after the storm. Isn't it? Later that night, I sat on my balcony again, wrapped in a shawl, sipping tea with honey. I thought of Charles, not with the sharp ache of grief, but with gentle memory. I thought of all the years I spent being quiet, so someone else could be loud. All the pieces of myself I'd tucked away for the sake of peace. But most of all, I thought of who I had become since then. Sadie the bookseller, Sadie the teacher, Sadie the woman who chose herself. And then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Carol. "We're reading Little Women next week at the shelter. I thought of you. Beth's courage, Marmie's quiet strength. You live in every page. I love you. Mom." I typed back, "Save me a seat. I'll be there for the next chapter." As I put the phone down and looked out across the dark water, I felt the kind of peace I'd spent decades chasing, because I finally understood the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. There's something I've come to understand about life, especially now. In this quieter chapter, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply choose yourself. For most of my life, I didn't. I was the daughter who obeyed, the wife who compromised, the mother who stayed silent. And for a long time, I believed that was strength, being dependable, being steady, putting everyone else first. But strength isn't measured by how much of yourself you give away. It's measured by how much of yourself you fight to keep. When I left my daughter's house that morning, months ago, I wasn't just walking away from a home that no longer felt like mine. I was walking toward the version of myself I'd lost over the years, the woman I was before the titles, before wife, before mother defined me completely. I didn't have a plan. I had a suitcase, $4, $300 in savings, and a lifetime of quietly accumulated strength. That was enough to get me to Seabrook, enough to find work at a small bookshop with a kind man named Harold, enough to create a new rhythm, surrounded by storybooks and children's laughter and the sound of waves instead of silence, enough to rediscover who I was not in a grand, sweeping way, but in the smallest, most ordinary moments, folding blankets, brewing tea, reading aloud. That's how healing works, not with drama, but with consistency, not with lightning, but with light. And the most remarkable part of it all, the people who once saw me as invisible eventually began to see me again. Carol, the daughter who once called me dead weight, saw the woman who had carried more than she ever realized. She saw my silence not as passivity, but as patience. She saw my calm not as weakness, but as resilience. And in seeing me clearly, she began to see herself differently too. She started over. She rebuilt her business with integrity. She offered second chances to others, and in doing so, earned one for herself. We're not perfect now. No mother and daughter ever are, but we're honest. And that's more valuable than perfection ever was. When I sit in the reading corner of the shop on Saturday mornings, surrounded by children and storybooks and the warm scent of old paper, I often think about the journey that brought me here. It wasn't a straight line. It was jagged, complicated, full of hurt and doubt and a kind of loneliness I wouldn't wish on anyone. But it was also full of growth, because sometimes the hardest thing to do, the bravest thing to do, is to stop trying to be what everyone else needs and finally become who you need to be. That's what I hope anyone listening to my story remembers. Whether you're 70 or 17, it's never too late to say no to what no longer serves you. Say yes to what lights you up. Reclaim your voice, even if it trembles at first. Rewrite the ending, even if the beginning broke your heart. We all deserve that chance to become more than what we've been told we are, to walk away when love turns into obligation, to return when forgiveness is ready to meet us at the door, to bloom quietly, steadily, fiercely after the storm has passed. And so if you find yourself feeling like I once did, overlooked, forgotten, too old to begin again, let me tell you something I've learned in the most beautiful way. You are never too old to start your next chapter. I didn't find myself in grand gestures or big speeches. I found myself in a seaside town, in a bookshop filled with secondhand stories, in a man who saw me without needing to fix me, in the laughter of children who reminded me that joy can be small and still mean everything, and in a daughter who, at last, called me not a burden, but her example. That's more than I ever asked for. That's more than I ever thought I'd get. But life, when you let go of what holds you back, has a way of giving more than you imagine possible. If this story touched something inside you, if you've ever felt invisible or lost or unsure whether it's too late to reclaim your life, know this: it's not too late. Leave a comment. Share your story. Tell someone what chapter you're stepping into next. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel. Because we're building a place where stories like this live, where healing isn't just a hope, it's a beginning, where every listener, no matter their age, can say, "That sounds like me," and know they're not alone. I used to believe that a woman's story ended the day she became invisible, that once your hair turned silver, your children moved out, and your husband passed on or walked away. There wasn't much left but memories, quiet routines, and waiting for the world to slow down around you. But I don't believe that anymore, because somewhere along this winding road, through heartbreak and healing, silence and rediscovery, I learned something that changed me completely. A woman's story doesn't end when she becomes invisible. It begins when she finally decides to be seen by herself. I thought my life had ended the day Charles died. 45 years of marriage, and suddenly I was just Sadie, alone, lost, shrunken in my own skin. Then came the day I heard my daughter call me a burden dead weight. That moment hit harder than grief ever did, not because of the words, but because of how true they sounded coming from someone I raised, someone I sacrificed so much for. So I left, quietly, without drama, without confrontation. It wasn't revenge. It was resurrection. Seabrook gave me more than a roof and a job. It gave me space to exhale, to cry, to laugh without permission, to read stories to children, and remember that joy doesn't need a reason. Harold gave me more than kindness. He gave me the kind of attention that isn't about fixing or protecting, but about seeing. He looked at me like I wasn't someone's widow or someone's mother. I was just a woman, worthy of interest, worthy of peace. And Carol, my complicated, sharp-edged, ambitious daughter, she gave me something, too, something I didn't expect. She gave me forgiveness. I didn't ask for it, but I needed it. And in return, I forgave her, too. Because what we both carried all those years, what we inherited without meaning to, was the idea that love only comes through sacrifice, and that strength only comes through silence. But we were wrong. Real love isn't about losing yourself. It's about bringing your whole self to the table and being accepted anyway. Real strength isn't the absence of need. It's the courage to speak your truth, even when your voice shakes. Now, I carry my wedding ring in a porcelain teacup, not because I mourn what I lost, but because I honor what I lived through. I remember the love. I remember the loneliness. I remember the years I gave and gave, and the moment I chose to give something to myself. That teacup sits above my writing desk. Beside it is a photograph of me and Carol taken last month at the shelter, where she now teaches financial literacy to women who once thought they were worthless. I watch her speak, shoulders back, heart open, and I see a woman who is no longer running from my example, but building her own. She tells them it's never too late to learn, to start again, to stop apologizing for needing help. She tells them the story of a woman she once misunderstood her mother, and sometimes, when she finishes her talk, she asks me to read aloud, just like I used to, just like I do every Saturday at Harbor Lights Books. And when I do, those women toughened by life, but not broken, sit still and listen. Some close their eyes, some cry, some smile for the first time in months, because stories, told truthfully, can mend what life tried to tear. And now I know my story isn't one of endings. It's one of choosing. I chose to walk away. I chose to come back. I chose to forgive not just others, but myself. I chose to live, not just survive. And today, I choose joy. The kind that comes from a simple evening on a porch swing, from laughter with children and whispered bedtime stories, from being called by your name, not your role. Sadie, not someone's wife, not someone's mother, just Sadie. And that, I've found, is more than enough. If you've ever felt forgotten, like your best years were behind you, I hope my story reminds you, you are not finished. There's still a chapter waiting. You can still start again. You can still find your voice no matter how long it's been silent. And when you do, speak it, read it, live it, because your story matters, and it's worth telling. I turned 60 the day I realized I had raised a stranger. Carol had called the week before and said she might not make it to my birthday dinner. A client thing, she claimed. I told her I understood because that's what mothers do. Isn't it? Understand. Bend. Make excuses for the people we love. I spent the morning baking a lemon cake from scratch, the way I always did when she was little. I even pulled out the good china, the blue and white set we only used on special occasions. I set 2 places, just in case. By 7 o'clock, the candles on the cake had burned down to wax puddles. By 8, I gave up waiting. At 8:15, I opened my phone, and there it was, a photo on social media. Carol, beaming, holding a champagne flute beside her father's new wife. They were at a restaurant I couldn't afford on my best day, toasting some promotion or family milestone one I clearly wasn't part of. No one in that picture remembered what day it was, but I did, because it was the day I stopped pretending. I didn't cry, not right away. Instead, I sat on the couch in the dark, that awful lemon cake still untouched on the table, and thought about all the times I'd put myself last, all the ways I'd disappeared so Carol could shine, so Charles could lead, so peace could be kept. But peace built on silence isn't peace at all. It's erasure. That night, I took the cake outside and left it on the bench by the sea. Let the raccoons have a celebration, I thought. At least they show up when it matters. The next morning, I packed a small bag and left Seabrook for a few days. No note this time, just absence, the kind people notice when they finally feel it. I stayed with an old friend from my library days, someone who knew me long before I became someone's mother or someone's wife. We drank tea and talked like the years hadn't passed. She didn't ask questions, just let me be. On the 3rd morning, my phone rang. It was Carol. I almost didn't answer, but something, maybe the tiny echo of the girl she used to be, made me press accept. "Mom," she said softly. "I'm so sorry. I didn't speak. I know what I did," she continued. "I knew it was your birthday. I lied. I didn't want you to see me there. With them. With your father," I asked. My voice flat. "With his new wife," she said. "She planned the dinner. He said I didn't have to come, but I did. And then I saw your name pop up online. I saw that you were alone, and it hit me what I'd done. Carol," I said slowly, "do you know how many birthdays I spent making everyone else happy I do now?" She whispered. There was silence, heavy, aching silence. "I think I've spent most of my adult life trying not to become you," she admitted. I closed my eyes, but now that I'm older, I'm starting to realize you were stronger than I gave you credit for. You were always there, and I treated you like furniture, part of the background. I let her words sit. Then I said the one thing I knew would break her more than anger ever could. "I bought you that cake." I whispered, "I used the lemon recipe you loved as a girl." She broke. She cried, gasping through the phone like a child again, begging for forgiveness. I didn't offer it, not yet, because forgiveness isn't something you give just to ease someone else's guilt. It's something you offer when your heart is ready. But I said, "Come visit me," not to say sorry, just to sit with me, to remember. And she did. 2 days later, she arrived in Seabrook with a bouquet of wildflowers and eyes rimmed with shame. I didn't hug her right away. I let her speak first. "I forgot who you were," she said. but I'm starting to remember now. We walked the shore together that afternoon, neither of us speaking much. The waves did most of the talking. When we got back to the bookshop, she reached into her bag and handed me a small box. Inside was a silver locket. Inside the locket was a picture of the two of us, me holding her at age 5, her cheeks still round with babyhood, her arms wrapped around my neck. "I want to carry you with me now," she said, not as a burden, but as my root. And maybe that was the start of something new. Not perfect, but real. That evening, we shared a slice of fresh lemon cake under the reading nook lights. No candles, no decorations. Just two women starting over. For 10 long years, I cared for his mother as if she were my own. I changed her dressings, fed her soft meals when she could no longer hold a spoon, sat by her bedside through nights when her breathing grew shallow and scared. I did it out of love for a woman who had shown me more kindness than her own son ever did. But while I tended to her, he traveled. First, it was a quick work trip, then a client dinner. I never questioned. I trusted. Until one afternoon, I found a receipt tucked in his briefcase, a hotel in Miami. 2 glasses of champagne, 1 sweet, not a business trip, a betrayal. He had been with someone else while I bathed his dying mother. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I finished what I started. I stayed until her last breath, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Thank you." Then I packed my bags and walked out without a word. But I didn't just leave the house. I left the version of myself that begged to be seen. Now, I live by the sea. I paint. I read poetry aloud to strangers. I speak softly but never silence myself again. And when he called months later, saying, "I miss you," I replied, "You don't even know me." And that was the truth. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is knowing when to walk away. You can give someone your time, your loyalty, your heart, but if they only notice your worth when you're gone, they never truly saw you to begin with. Don't wait to be chosen. Choose yourself. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your journey, whether it's about healing, rediscovery, or finding your voice after silence. And if these stories help you feel seen, don't forget to subscribe, because every chapter of life deserves to be heard.